صباح الخير وأهلا وسهلا بالجميع. حضرة ممثلي الوزارات، ممثلي البلديات، ممثلي المنظمات الدولية والبعثات الأجنبية، ممثلي المنظمات غير الحكومية، المتحدثين والخبراء والزملاء الأعزاء، صباح الخير وأهلا بكم. شكرا على حضوركم معنا هذا الصباح وعلى القدوم من جميع أنحاء لبنان، وبعرف في ناس جايين من بعيد. أهلا وسهلا فيكم. قبل أن نبدأ أود أن أذكر الجميع بأن الترجمة الفورية من الإنجليزية إلى العربية متوفرة خلال الجلستين. صباح الخير مرة أخرى، اسمي مكرم عويس وأنا المدير التنفيذي للمركز اللبناني للدراسات. أود أن أعرب عن امتناني للمتحدثين والمتحدثات والخبراء والخبيرات الذين وافقوا على تقديم خبراتهم ووجهات نظرهم خلال هذا المؤتمر الذي ينظمه المركز اللبناني للدراسات بعنوان إطار عمل لدعم رواد الأعمال بحكم الضرورة في المناطق الريفية في لبنان، بالتعاون مع مركز المشروعات الدولية الخاصة الذي نشكر دعمه واهتمامه بالوضع الصعب الذي يعيشه اللبنانيين. يستند هذا المؤتمر إلى عمل زميلتنا الباحثة الدكتورة لينا مداح التي أجرت أبحاثا مكتبية وميدانية سابقة في 3 مناطق شبه ريفية في لبنان، وطاولات مستديرة وندوات تداولت تأثير الأزمة على رواد الأعمال بحكم الضرورة في المناطق الريفية في لبنان. إذن مؤتمرنا اليوم هو تتويج لهذه الأبحاث، ونهدف من خلاله إلى مشاركة نتائج الأبحاث ومناقشة الإصلاحات المحتملة مع مختلف أصحاب المصلحة والخبرة لتمكين رواد الأعمال المدفوعين بحكم الضرورة للنمو وإضفاء الطابع النظامي على أعمالهم. اليوم لبنان يخوض أزمة لم يسبق لها مثيل في تاريخه المعاصر، وفي جميع المناطق اللبنانية. وعلى ضوء هذه الظروف لجأ العديد من المواطنين إلى ريادة الأعمال كوسيلة للخروج من الأزمة. رواد الأعمال هؤلاء مدفوعون بالضرورة ويعيش العديد منهم في المناطق الريفية. إنهم بحاجة إلى دعمنا ودعمكم لتأمين معيشتهم وتطوير عملهم. نأمل أن يولد هذا المؤتمر أفكار وتصورات لسبل دعم مستقبلية متعلقة بهذه الفئة من العمال. ينظم عملنا هذا الصباح حول محورين. الجلسة الأولى هي بعنوان تعزيز ثقافة ريادة الأعمال المحلية والمؤسسات المحلية، وتنقسم إلى أقسام فرعية يركز كل منها على موضوع مرتبط بدعم رواد الأعمال المدفوعين بحكم الضرورة. ويدور القسم الأول حول معالجة الطابع غير النظامي مع السيد جاد ياسين من منظمة العمل الدولية ILO. أما القسم الفرعي الثاني فسيتناول التخطيط الاستراتيجي والتفكير التصميمي لرواد الأعمال مع السيدة أسيل حنين من Parallel Studio. وسيتبع ذلك قسم فرعي ثالث حول التنويع في القطاعات الاقتصادية الذي تقدمه الدكتورة لينا مداح. وستختتم الجلسة الأولى مع السيد علي سعد من مفوضية الأمم المتحدة لشؤون اللاجئين UNHCR الذي سيتحدث عن التحول الرقمي والتكنولوجيا ونقل المعرفة. تترأس الجلسة الدكتورة لينا مداح. أما بالنسبة للجلسة الثانية فستتناول الأدوات الاقتصادية لدعم رواد الأعمال بحكم الضرورة، وتنقسم أيضا إلى أقسام فرعية مختلفة. ويدور القسم الأول حول التعليم والتدريب المهني مع الدكتورة جوزيان فهد سريح من LAU. أما القسم الفرعي الثاني فسيتناول التعاونيات والتضامن مع السيدة ماري لويز حايك من منظمة الأغذية والزراعة للأمم المتحدة فاو، وسيتبع ذلك قسم فرعي ثالث حول التواصل على طول سلاسل القيمة الذي تقدمه السيدة ندى نهرة من برنامج الأمم المتحدة الإنمائي UNDP. وستختتم الجلسة الثانية مع السيد نيكولا فوتيادس من Orient Financial Solution الذي سيتحدث عن الدعم المالي لرواد الأعمال بحكم الضرورة. تترأس الجلسة الثانية الدكتورة ليلى داغر من AUB، زميلة لدى المركز اللبناني للدراسات. للتذكير سنأخذ استراحة لتناول قهوة بين كلتا الجلستين مع الغداء بعد الجلسة الثانية، نأمل أن تبقوا معنا. بعد كل جلسة سيتم نقاش مع الحضور الكريم حول مضمون المداخلات والاقتراحات المطروحة، نأمل أن تولد استنتاجات ذات صلة. اسمحوا لي قبل أن أعرف عن زميلة الدكتورة لينا مداح وأعطيها الكلمة أن أشكر فريق عمل المركز اللبناني للدراسات على كل الجهود لإنجاح هذا المؤتمر. لينا مداح هي باحثة اقتصادية في المركز اللبناني للدراسات، وتشمل مجالات عملها التنمية الاقتصادية والاقتصاد الإقليمي والمواقع الصناعية وديناميكيات المؤسسات والصناعات الثقافية والإبداعية. في رصيد مداح شهادة دكتوراه في الاقتصاد من جامعة روفيرا إيفيرجيلي يونيفرسيتي في إسبانيا. قبل انضمامها إلى مركز اللبناني للدراسات شغلت منصب باحثة زائرة في منظمة التعاون الاقتصادي والتنمية OECD في البندقية إيطاليا، وفي مختبر الاقتصادات الإقليمية التطبيقية في جامعة إلينوي أوربانا شامبين في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، وباحثة اقتصادية في قسم الاقتصاد في جامعة روفيرا إيفيرجيلي. وشاركت في العديد من المنصات الاقتصادية الوطنية والدولية التي تناولت العلوم الإقليمية، الصناعات الثقافية والإبداعية، والتنمية المحلية والجغرافيا الاقتصادية. وهي حالياً أيضاً محاضرة في الجامعة اللبنانية الأمريكية. شكراً، والكلمة لك لينا.
Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for this conference. As you all are aware by now, for the past 2 years, Lebanon has been assailed with compounded crises that left the economy reeling: the financial crisis, the COVID-19 break, and of course the Beirut port explosion. These crises have resulted in many challenges for Lebanese businesses, such as capital account restrictions, high inflation, border closure, lockdown, crumbling infrastructure, and sporadic electricity cuts, and many more. One type of businesses in particular is assumed to be affected the most during the crisis and is seen to be one among the drivers of the Lebanese economy: the necessity-driven entrepreneurships. As these businesses constitute a large portion of informal employment in Lebanon, they struggle with precarious work conditions and vulnerability. Further, necessity-driven entrepreneurs tend to lack the means and the resources to hedge against any crisis that they face today. Many studies have revealed that necessity-driven entrepreneurs essentially tend to open their enterprises as a result of lack of job opportunities and employment opportunities, so they tend to do some work in other sectors back in the rural areas. Still, this form of entrepreneurship provides a much-needed source for livelihoods and many families in Lebanese rural areas. So any shocks to these businesses will affect their sustainability, will increase poverty rates, will increase deprivation in rural areas, and will ultimately shatter the country's economic stability, if any remaining. In partnership with the Center for International Private Enterprise, the Lebanese Center for Policy Studies has conducted a study on the short-term effects of the crisis on necessity-driven entrepreneurs in Lebanon's rural areas. The rippling effect of the present-day overlapping crisis in Lebanon for private businesses has yet to be fully understood. Many studies have tried to address the impact of the crisis on the private sector. However, many of them are dismissing the large informal employment or are focusing on the national level rather than smaller geographical and more vulnerable rural areas. Therefore, there was a need to sufficiently qualify the challenges faced by businesses to remain operational and sustainable. This is of particular importance in Lebanon's rural areas where SMEs are mainly concentrated. In 2011, we have conducted a detailed study on NDEs, the necessity-driven entrepreneurs, consisting of individual interviews and focus groups in 3 main rural areas in Lebanon: Fnaidik, Haidab, and Rashaya. The main objectives of the study were to identify the key challenges and the short-term effects of the crisis on NDEs and to try to gain an in-depth insights on the NDEs' needs and requirements. This study is a qualitative research of 2 phases. In phase 1, we conducted 12 in-depth interviews, 4 key informat interviews in each of the 3 areas, with active people in the community, mayors, municipal heads of municipalities, NGOs, etc., in order to identify the necessity-driven businesses, subsectors in each of these areas, and to identify whether there is a support system which have helped to help these businesses during the crisis. Then we conducted focus groups in phase 2, 12 focus groups, 4 focus groups in each of the 3 areas. Also, NDEs were grouped in similar subsectors in order to enhance the capture of relevant insight. Building on our findings, we have provided contextualized recommendations to stakeholders and advocated with local decision makers to address issues of local businesses. We have issued 3 reports, each related to 1 geographical area on the impact of the short-term effect of the crisis on necessity-driven entrepreneurs. We have issued 1 policy brief, and we have conducted 2 podcasts mainly targeting the agricultural sector. We also had 3 webinars related to design thinking, the missing link between local stakeholders and NDEs, and 1 focuses on the creative industries. Also, we have done roundtables in these rural areas in order to discuss our findings with local policymakers. So I'm going to present now the main findings of our research. So findings have revealed numerous challenges facing NDEs, particularly in light of the multiple crises. Of course, the challenges differ slightly between subsectors and between the areas, but however, we can identify a certain set of common challenges which include the difficulty in accessing finance, relatively low level of entrepreneurial skills, low limited market networks, inefficient legal frameworks that constrain formalization, among others. Thus, policymakers are today urged to unlock the potential of NDEs, especially in rural areas, through high-impact strategies ranging from well-established infrastructure to enabling entrepreneurial ecosystems. I start with the main challenges facing NDEs in rural areas in the agricultural sector. NDEs in the agricultural sector, especially smallholder farmers, have identified these challenges. First, the high production costs associated with high dependency on imports, high operational costs allocated to plowing and land maintenance, inefficient labor market characterized by high costs, low bargaining power of farmers, and the absence or weaknesses of available unions, irrigation challenges and water scarcity, limited seasonal work due to the cold weather. Also, negligence and mismanagement in providing support, difficulty in accessing larger markets for smallholder farmers mainly, a rise in crop theft and social unrest, lack of infrastructure support mechanisms, lack of social protection schemes targeting low-income farmers, and increased challenges with stakeholders' communication and the trust among stakeholders within the community. Just to give an example, if we can move to the next slide, this is a more dig-in insight on our findings in Rashaya and Hadab. So though people and NDEs are moving back to agriculture, which is a path forward, yet it's full of obstacles for them. Among their major challenges is irrigation, lack of sustainable water management at the municipal level, additional operational costs for farmers incurred from buying water, in addition, for example, to challenges for the beekeepers, like importing hives and associated costs, the theft of the beehives and the social unrest, increasing costs of moving the beehives to the coast, and difficulty registering honey brands in the Ministry of Agriculture. If we move to another subsector, please. Yes. The challenges in the food processing industry, NDEs in the food processing sectors have faced many challenges, one of which is the gaps in the supply chain infrastructure, inadequate primary processing, storage, and distribution facilities, inability to forecast their fixed and operational costs in order to be able to price their goods and services, insufficient linkages between producers and farmers, and then the market. A third sector is the retail sector. Its main challenges are the lack of the know-how to access e-commerce markets, low per capita income of rural areas, which of course restrains the purchasing power of people in the rural areas, COVID-19 back then related restrictions, difficulties in preserving goods, low level of literacy, underdeveloped communication infrastructure, insufficient resources to cover the high costs of marketing, high distribution costs, and difficulties in pricing products due to currency devaluation. If we move to the ecotourism sector, which is also a prominent sector in the rural areas, yet we can say it's a little bit underestimated, the main challenges are constrained access to finance, increasing operational costs of services, seasonal challenges and limited diversification, falling demand for ecotourism services due to security concerns, and the lack of research on marketing and tourism supply. Also, we looked at the artisan-based sector, including crafts, cultural heritage, and creative industries, and we find problems allocated to the high cost of imported raw materials due to currency devaluation, barriers to digital adoption, and difficulty as well in registering brands. If we look, for example, at these two main craftsmanship, in Rashaya, for example, the fireplace craftsmanship and the ancient craft of silversmith, back, for example, over the past two decades, Rashaya was famous in these crafts. There were 8 silver shops in Rashaya's old souk with more than 40 jewelers and their family members working in it. They used to participate in exhibitions, and in the last 2 years, only 2 shops remained in operations. So the study concludes with a set of recommendations for a more inclusive and integrated entrepreneurial rural policy in Lebanon. What would such a policy entail is the subject now. So we try to outline some targeted actions to overcome the economic, socio-cultural, and financial barriers, particularly in rural areas. Of course, our experts are going to elaborate further on each of these policy recommendations that we provide. I here provide some effective economic policy measures to promote rural NDEs activities and economic growth in general terms. We talk about designing and integrated a progressive vision for rural areas and an attempt to shift them from areas of stagnation to areas of opportunity, promoting an inclusive democratic engagement, enhancing digital infrastructure, adopting remote forms of services delivery to rural areas, delivering financial and technical aid to support social innovation, addressing circular economy, of course, potential and green strategy on our way to recovery. Also, other policy recommendations shall include the support of rural diversification, considering the future shift towards a knowledge economy in rural areas, supporting local entrepreneurship ecosystems, developing agricultural and industrial cooperatives and organizations, investing in social capital that can sustain local entrepreneurship, among which are NDEs, of course, facilitating access to financial resources, fostering the digital integration to shorten food supply chains, among other sectors, of course, promoting strategic planning for rural areas, creating synergies across several policy dimensions. So this was a brief on our research which have been done on this matter. I'm going to start the first panel, so I would like to invite the speakers in order to discuss the several themes. Mr. Jad Yassin, an economist and national officer at the International Labour Organization, ILO. He is an experienced economist with a demonstrated history of working in public policy. His research interests include economic research planning, social development strategies, and market analysis. Prior to working with ILO, Jad has served as an economist at Dar el-Handasa and a senior research at Trust Executive Search. He holds a master's degree in labor market policy with a focus on economic policy from the USG, Beirut, and he also completed a Bachelor of Science in Economics. I also welcome our expert on design thinking, Ms. Asila Hnain. She is a Lebanese architect and entrepreneur who is passionate about social business innovation and expanding the role of women in their economic involvement. She is the founder of Indigo Kuspa, a creative recreational resort and guest house in rural area of North Lebanon, promoting ecotourism and sustainable development. Asil is also the creator of Architecture in a Box, an award-winning L&D startup that promotes design thinking to help educators teach while kids have fun applying knowledge in math, science, language, and culture. Me, Lina, okay, and I also welcome Mr. Ali Saad. Ali is a geographic information system and data analysis specialist. He has been working with the United Nations in Lebanon for the past 10 years. He currently works with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, as an information management officer and has previously worked with UN Habitat as a geographic information system officer and information management officer. His work focuses on developing data collection processes and telling stories with data by utilizing data analysis and visualization techniques. His portfolio includes projects such as city and neighborhood profiles, the Syrian refugee crisis response, and the Beirut blast response. Through his work, Ali aims to build data-driven working environments to support planning and designing. So I thank our experts for their participation, and perhaps we can start with Jad on addressing informality. Thank you.
من هون أحسن يمكن. All right. I don't want to set the trend that makes anyone uncomfortable. بس أنا من هون مرتاح أكتر. صباح الخير جميعا. أكيد بشكر لينا ودكتور مكرم على الدعوة. اسمي جاد ياسين. أنا خبير اقتصادي بمنظمة العمل الدولية. إذا ما في مشكل لأنه شايف كم حدا حاطط هيدفونز يمكن فينا نقول على الإنجليزي أسرع وأحسن يكون. I'm an economist in the ILO. I handle basically projects related to employment, meaning decent employment generation, improving working conditions. We handle in the office here in Beirut the Arab states, which is the eastern part of the Arab world, let's say. So the 11th with the GCC. yeah, so that's basically it. We're here today to talk about, I'm here today to talk about informality in Lebanon. And this is a subject that we've devoted a lot of resources to lately in the ILO, and for obvious reasons, which I will discuss. So basically, in the next 10 minutes, we're going to discuss three main questions. One is, what is the state of informality in Lebanon? Basically, what do the figures say? What does our research say? What are the causes, right? And the effects, of course. And I want to end with a few recommendations on how we can tackle informality in a more productive, effective way, because what's been happening is obviously not ideal. So let me start with what is the state of informality in Lebanon. I'm not sure if you have had the chance to look at the latest follow-up labor force survey, which was published in 2022, actually in January. This was a project done by the Central Administration of Statistics, of course with the help of the ILO. This comes as a follow-up survey because the last one that was done was in 2018-2019. It was very extensive, nationally representative, of course, but a lot happened since 2018-2019. So the goal was to try to capture that moment in the labor market, which is 2021, according to the data. And on the issue of informality, there has been a clear degradation of the situation in Lebanon. Now, when we talk about informality, we usually, at the ILO, we like to separate informality into two sections, right? So there's the informal sector, which has a lot to do with the company itself and how the company is run and the legality of the sector, or at least the company and the sector. And there's informal employment, which has a lot more to do with the relationship between the employer and the employee and their employer, or vice versa. So you would have informal employment in the formal sector. Unfortunately, we even have it in the public sector in Lebanon, which is mind-blowing, actually. But you can also have formal employment in the informal sector, which is something different. I don't want to go through how the data sort of like, I will mention the figure for each one, but there are some statistical nuances here that it's probably not the best to go into. So when I talk about informality, I will talk about informal employment, unless I talk about informal companies, just as a caveat. So as it stands, the informal employment level in Lebanon in 2022, in January 2022, was more than 60%, 62 point something percent. Now that's a drastic increase from an already drastic level in 2018-2019, which was 54%, let's say, or 55%. So already we started with the majority of employment being informal employment, and the rule being informal employment, the exception being actual formal, decent employment. So this is in terms of informal employment. Now, employment in the informal sector, which has maybe, which relates directly to the idea of NDEs, has also doubled, right? Actually more than doubled. It went from 13% to actually over 30%. The exact figure for your reference is 35.2%. So a third of employment right now is happening in companies that are informal. So that makes the issue of informality, even though it has always been under the ILO, we've always given it a lot of importance, it makes it even a lot more urgent right now, because we need to create employment. And we don't actually need to create just employment. When we say create employment, we mean create decent employment, and that means creating employment in the formal sector, or at least formal employment in general. So the situation is dire, and as we try to sort of create employment and help the Lebanese government and our constituents move forward and navigate this crisis and create the employment, it's important for us to make sure that those jobs are actually good jobs that people want to take, and not just jobs that are forced to take, that are necessity-driven, which would in turn mean that these jobs would offer very poor working conditions, no social security, no paid sick leave, annual leave, that kind of thing. So so that was in general informality in Lebanon. Now, there's a lot of causes that are behind those, like pretty daunting figures in terms of informality. So first, so I want to list like basically five reasons why informality is that widespread. And I should add that informality is widespread in the developing world. That is generally a trend that we see. And perhaps before I start criticizing informality, it's also important to say that informality in itself is not, I mean, of course it's some formal employment is the ultimate goal, but informality is sometimes used in situations of crises like these because they allow for a lot more flexibility and elasticity in terms of supply and demand, which formal employment does not offer. So if you open a company right now and you're pretty sure that you're going to work for the next 3-4 months, but you're not sure if you're going to make it to the next year, you'll probably employ someone informally, maybe without a contract or with a oral or illegal or paralegal contract. So the first reason is labor market institutions are really weak in Lebanon. And when we say labor market institutions, we're not necessarily only talking about government institutions. Unions are labor market institutions. Associations of employers are labor market institutions. Any institution in the social sense that actually has an influence on how the labor market is run is a labor market institution. And all of those are weak in Lebanon. There's no need to talk a lot about how the government side of things is weak. Obviously, we know a lot of these institutions are understaffed, they're underfunded, under-resourced, and the general approach of policymakers in Lebanon in the previous decades has not been very conducive to policymaking and comprehensive sort of scientific approaches to the labor market. It's always been just making up solutions as we go, and this hasn't really addressed the structural issues. And I would like just to mention one more thing on the idea of unions. They are a weak institution, but the reasons for their weakness, of course, has a lot to do with them, but also has some to do with the legal framework that governs union work and that protects workers unionizing and that kind of thing. There are also sectoral factors for informality. So, of course, some activities are seasonal by definition. So these are a major generator of informality, whether in terms of institutions, establishments, or informal employment. And there's a lot of activities that are low productivity, and low productivity activities tend to be informal jobs and informal activities as well, because the margins are not big enough to sort of run this operation, which we'll talk to, and actually I'll talk about right now, which is the third reason, the cost of formality. Formality is not free, and it's not the decision that someone makes based on their ethical stance, at least not always. In Lebanon, what we've seen is that formality itself is very costly. Now, of course, it's costly in monetary terms, in terms of the taxes, social security contributions, that kind of thing. And it's also very costly in terms of resources, because if you want to run a government, run an institution formally, what you need to do is have an HR department, you have to have accounting, you need to have people that follow up with the tax authorities and the social security authorities. So it's quite an operation that the activities that have been the most prominent in Lebanon do not necessarily always justify. Of course, there are legal reasons for informality as well. Meaning, the legal aspect, of course, sort of is mainstream throughout the entire thing, but there are purely legal aspects to informality. If you are a migrant worker that wants to work in basically every job except 3, you are by definition an informal worker. Even if the worker and their employer wanted to formalize that relationship, they cannot. That is by definition, right? So, and that is also a big obstacle that is one of the, in practical terms, one of the simpler to solve, meaning you just basically change the law, and we've been pushing for that. The last thing is informal work relationships, and I think that's really important, especially in the rural context that Lina and the researchers have been talking about. Jobs in Lebanon tend to be, because we don't have, goes back to labor institutions actually, but because we don't have labor intermediation institutions that are proper, what happens is most of the people would look for jobs through their own networks. which is something possibly we've all been through at one point in our careers. So, but the problem is when you engage, when that work relationship is informal, whether it's your cousin, your neighbor, a friend of your parents, when the relationship starts this informally, it's very difficult to sort of incorporate, if needed, the legal elements to pursue or to guard the rights, whether the employer or the employee. Usually the employee is the most vulnerable in this situation. So, for example, if I got a job at my uncle's shop, I will probably not go and ask him for a contract because the relationship might be a little different, and that's maybe not what he had in mind. Maybe he thought that through recruitment informally, they can actually get an informal worker, not someone that they're going to have to contribute to Social Security for and that kind of thing. So as these labor intermediation institutions grow weaker, which is basically NEO in Lebanon, which is the National Employment Office, and there's a lot more unemployment, there's a lot more supply of labor, these informal relationships are strong. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is I think this is a quite peculiar case within the different 5 causes, because this is a situation where interventions are not necessarily wanted by either party. So so as a government, I'm supposed to enforce the application of laws. But if you go to an employer and employee who are related and try to sort of convince them that they should formalize the relationship, because any work relationship should be formal, it's a lot difficult. It's a different arrangement than it is to legalize sort of formal work for migrant workers. And I think this is something that we oversee because we tend to deal with informality as something that is unwanted, and in most of the cases it is, but sometimes when it's wanted, you need to have the right tools to sort of handle that. So this is in general why we have so much informality in Lebanon. Now, it's very important to switch to the formal sector, to formalize employment relationships and to formalize businesses. And formalizing business is also very important, even if you're looking at it from a labor point of view, because the informal sector, already it employs so many workers, and these workers are in 99% of the case informal, so it's an issue. So why is it a good pursuit to sort of formalize, especially in the context of employment generation, in the context of a crisis like the one Lebanon is going through, where this whole entire system is basically faltering? I would like to point out 3 basically categories, let's say, of advantages of formality. So for the people themselves, it's clear that formality involves better protection of rights, whether through the laws or in terms of the salary payment and that kind of thing. So that sort of formalizes even that, and it allows them to ensure that their rights are going to be safeguarded. And something else is it allows them to attain the public policy spectrum and to be represented in public policy arenas. If you recall, there was a push to sort of formalize migrant workers a few years back. For example, the main advantage of that effort had it been, or if it's completely successful, would be to allow that portion of the workers to actually go and be represented in forums where they should be, where their issues are being discussed. And this applies to all of the workers, but migrant workers, since they are also by definition informal. Even for the companies themselves, formality is very important. Of course, it allows you to get to loans, improves your credit scores, of course, other factors of production that are not necessarily available to informal companies, or at least not as easily. You can also get access to government programs, which is not the main maybe advantage in Lebanon, but these are coming, and being formal sort of allows you to get to it. For example, what we've seen throughout the world is when the COVID crisis hit and the governments were scrambling to sort of get that help to the people in need, informal workers, because they are by definition outside of the government's basically main scope, which is tax credit and Social Security, they tended to not benefit as much as formal workers, and informal institutions tended to not benefit as much as formal institutions. So even for institutions, it creates a lot of opportunities. It improves the ability to follow up on contracts and to enforce contracts. But even more importantly for society itself, informality is something worth pursuing. First of all, the tax base increases, which is in the benefit of all taxpayers, right? The more formal employment happens, the more company and formal activities happen, the bigger the tax base, which is quite the sort of self-explanatory. There's more equality, of course, that comes, of course, with taxes, but it also, and that's very important in terms of the macroeconomic side of things, you cannot have, and we're going to talk about this in a couple of minutes on informal workers, but you cannot have formal and informal institutions competing in a free market. It just doesn't work. You're telling the formal institutions or the formal workers that they should switch to informality, because otherwise it's just, given the costs that we've just described, the costs of formality could just be too big, right? So, and of course it improves access to foreign markets, exports, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of advantages. That's not really the main point. So I will take the next 6 minutes to talk about basically what we think we can do to improve informality. So I want to talk, I have basically six policy orientations that I would like to run by you, and we can, of course, discuss. So the first orientation is something that we're referring to, sort of humanizing informality, let's say. Because as a starting point, of course, informality must be tackled. But given the structural issues that sort of like feed into informality and sort of keep reinforcing it, any solution to informality, whether informal activities or informal employment, will at best be a medium-term solution. But the figures that we have, meaning over 60% of people in informal employment, and by the way, we did a survey in 2021, just so you understand how the gravity of the issue. It was mainly targeted at vulnerable populations, right? So vulnerable Lebanese and Syrian and Palestinian refugees. So for example, between Syrian and Palestinian refugees, this was a survey done obviously by the ILO with the help of the Ford Foundation. And what we found, for example, between Palestinians and Syrians, the informality in 2021, mind you, so I'm assuming it's a lot higher now, if it was possible, was more than 90%. So for every 10 workers, 9 of them are working informally. And most of them, because they don't have the chance, either because it's too costly to formalize or because the law just doesn't allow them to work formally. And that's something important, because even when we accounted for example, things such as education or the activity itself, right? Vulnerable populations tended to be more geared towards informal activities. And the reasons, of course, a few reasons are quite obvious, one of them being they just need the income. And this aspect of needing the income is something that we do not want policymakers to forget right now, which is why we're saying it should be humanized. So there are some issues that you could take, there are some steps that you can take to improve the status and the conditions of informal workers without necessarily just saying, oh, you're illegal, you either go to prison or just quit. So one of them would be enforcing their union representation. That would be something that is, again, like obviously the migrant workers example, but it could be applied to basically everything. There's a lot, because informality is that driven by need and the fact that you have basically very few options in the labor market, whether it leads you to NDEs or not, to becoming an NDE or to working informally, or usually both. It has a lot to do with the power to bargain. That's what we've seen. And that's something that's sort of overlooked. Because when you deal with structural issues, you need to understand that it's at the bargaining table where these workers and employers are being present, and where the worker is being offered an informal employment or zero income. That is a main issue. So if you sort of expand the base and allow workers this sort of collective bargaining, it also helps, because we've seen informality in areas that are not necessarily, where it's not necessarily explained by low productivity. It's not necessarily explained by the crisis or the COVID or the lockdown measures. It's just the bargaining power of people. عندي شغل تاخده أو لا. It's just that's the situation where people have to be, that the informal workers are in before they get the work. So I'll go a little quicker. But I just wanted to stress that because that's not something we see, and I think that's something that requires a lot more attention than the others that maybe you've seen before. So support MSMEs, of course, because MSMEs are the biggest employers in the country, and they are the one with the weak. They've suffered a lot during the crisis because they don't have that sort of financial buffer to sort of get through the times of economic downturns. Of course, expanding Social Security is also very important, again, in terms of not having people choose between working informally or die, which is all that basically this entire approach is. So expand social protection and Social Security, and have training programs directed specifically at informal workers, specifically with the skills that they need to become formal, and obviously have the program sort of built in a way where vulnerable populations get access in terms of logistics and that kind of thing. So the second thing is making sure that we know about informality in general. The institutions in the Lebanese government that are supposed to oversee the application of whether it's the commercial laws or the labor laws are weak. And we need stronger institutions. There's just no getting by it, because for as long as informality has existed, it has been cheaper in the pure financial terms than formality. And so there will always be an advantage for people, or for either for companies or for employers, to sort of go to informality. It could be just the way to survive if formality is completely out of the question, but also could be just the way to maximize profits. But what that means is enforcement is necessary. This is not an ethical discussion. There needs to be enforcement. That means linking your Social Security number with your tax number. That means identification cards for workers to be issued before they join. They need, for example, one other thing that they could do is to register the worker automatically and not have to wait that 3 months to have them registered in Social Security, and have a safe line for whistleblowers to sort of be able to reach out to those institutions that would ideally be revamped, and to address their concerns with that, because there's a lot of fear obviously involved. Nobody wants to lose their job for the Social Security part of it, especially if they need it bad, so it has to be safe, which is, to be honest, not necessarily the case now. The third one is leveling the playing field. Leveling the playing field between the workers. As we said, you cannot have informal workers competing with formal workers. You cannot have informal institutions competing with formal institutions. So the Article 7 of the labor law that just says that these people are covered by these people are not covered by the labor law should just be abolished by now. There's just no point in having this sort of like, especially that we're talking about labor rights that are in essence human. One other thing that could be done is, and that's been done in Jordan, which is a golden list, basically, that we just have to obviously apply to. But as soon as you get in, of course, you have to be applying the labor law to an outstanding level. And of course, you have to be formal and to apply all of the laws in general. This is just an example. In Jordan, it was mainly directed at the labor law, but it could be done otherwise. And these people get access to easier credit, easier export facilities, that kind of thing. This could also sort of feed into the momentum to formalize. offering free HR and what do you call it, CRM programs for MSMEs is also important. Sort of minimize the resources needed to run a company formally. There's a lot of software right now available that allows them. And of course, working with unions and unions and associations of employers are necessary. I'd just like to list the last three, and then I'll open it up for questions. Of course, the third one being we need jobs. It's just no getting around it. We need decent formal jobs. As long as decent formal jobs are not there, tackling informality we can't work. It just can't. So we need jobs. That means economic strategies. That means a national employment policy that Lebanon agreed to sort of write in the 70s, and we've yet to see one national employment policy in Lebanon. That's Convention 122, International Labor Convention 122. That's been signed since the 70s, and Lebanon has no national employment policies. And we need to change the general perceptions of informality and formality. Of course, here, capacity building, raising awareness between new entrants to the workforce about their rights, duties, that kind of thing is also very helpful. I'm going quickly, not because this is something minimal, but because we're out of time, and I'm sure you've heard of these before. And as the ILO, we always stand by tripartism, which is the solution for informality, and the solution for any issue that has to do with the labor market has to be done trilaterally, meaning governments, workers, and employers have to be at the same table with an equal footing so they can negotiate, because these are the people involved in the labor market. I will stop here. I'm sorry if I spoke out of time. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Jawad, for this very interesting intervention on addressing informality. If anyone has any questions, let's keep them till the end of the panel, so we'll then answer all questions together, okay? So I'll move to the second session on strategic planning and design thinking for entrepreneurs with Asil. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, LCPS and SAIB, for this great initiative to start a dialogue for us in the stakeholders interested in really making a transformational change in our beloved country. And definitely, I totally agree with your research. There is a great underestimation for the rural areas where we can really, it's like a hidden treasure, where it's uninvestigated, where there's a lot of opportunities for growth, development, and change. But definitely, this requires a holistic approach, that's for sure. This requires a lot of work and design thinking. Luckily, I'm a design thinking expert, and I would like to share how I became an expert. So around 10 years ago, I came back from to Lebanon, and I was already all over the world. Like, I studied architecture, I did my master's abroad, I worked in the Gulf areas, I worked in the MENA region. I worked and I was really interested to become less of a corporate architect and more for an architect for the community. Because at the end of the day, I did architecture so I can build nicer towns and cities and to live in them. And not to be engaging in gentrified big island somewhere in the middle of nowhere, not really sustainable. So really, this was a lot of work from my end to go seek something like that, and it took me in a journey all over the world. For example, I engaged in community-based projects in rural areas around the world, in Latin America, in South America, in Haiti, in the Philippines, in India, in areas where I realized, after I had a lot of education from the States and Europe, that I could not necessarily apply it as it is in my beloved country or my hometown, because later on I will share how I am one of the NDEs, necessity-driven entrepreneurs, where I opened guest houses in my Kura district out of necessity. So what happened throughout the process, when I came back home, I thought I'm ready. Now I have the tools, resources, I know how can I create change, I know how to talk to communities, but the truth is, no, we're not ready for that. There is a lot of need that is beyond my own help. Like, this is a holistic approach. It needs policies, it needs engagement, it needs institutions, it needs researchers. We need all of us collectively to work together to really create a sustainable change. So I came up with a process to help my students back at the Lebanese American University to create innovations that address socio-economic problems in their own neighborhood. For example, they live in different areas in Lebanon. There are no electricity, there is no waste management, there are no good practices in the architectural envelope of each building, for example. So we decided, why not create project with our students to create change? So students were not trained to be analytical problem solvers. They were really good listeners, you know? So I decided to come up with a system that will allow them to break down a problem, create a solution, and test it to make sure that it works or if it's viable. And turn out, years later, I learned from Stanford that this is called design thinking. So we want to say, what is design thinking? It sounds like it's a thinking process, but actually it's an actionable process. It's a list of actions that you take that starts by identifying really what's the problem and what's the challenge here. It's not what we always think it is, the problem. Many times we think that the problem is the mindset of the people. The problem is, we always have this theory, what is the problem? But when we go to actions and take little initiatives, we realize like sometimes it's much simpler, sometimes it's much more complicated. One of the issues, social problems I wanted to address when I was also an instructor at LAU was to empower women engineers. I thought, according to ILO statistics, 97% of women in the order of engineers in Lebanon, which means Tripoli and Beirut, do not practice engineering. I really thought it's a mindset problem. It's a culture problem. I really thought later on maybe the market is not allowing them to have the right environment and it's male-dominated. But turn out it's way more than that. After one initiative and another, it doesn't mean I failed. It means I was trying to learn more about the problem, the nature of the problem, because it's beyond me, you know? And I realized later on, working with these women, it's too late. They are already at the university. They want to get married or move on to event planning or fashion design, but they're not really interested. So this is where we started by working in parallel studio with little girls before they go to the school. We trained more than 600 girls. And at that time, when most of them said we don't want to become engineers, we were happy because this does not contribute to the 97%, that is a growing number. And we're making professionals later on who are really committed, passionate, and they are capable of change. So also after that, because it's a continuing process throughout the revolution and the crisis where students no longer went to schools and we could no longer give them this kind of workshop, we come up with Architecture in a Box. It's a whole tool where it teaches kids about the city. And this is where we realized it's not just about orientation and architecture, it's beyond that. Why don't we teach in schools our right to our city and towns, the green, our responsibilities, why do we need to wait for someone to fix that hole in the ground, right? Like, we can do it, come on. So what I'm trying to say here is that design thinking, it's a way of life for me. It's a way where you don't necessarily need someone to start telling you we need to change. It's about little initiatives, taking little actions day after day to make it better. If we have some kind of a sickness, we cannot decide in 1 month I will lose 20 kilos. Eventually, from today till after 1 year, I will lose 20 kilos and I will become healthy again. So the same thing here in healing our cities and towns. So today I wanted to share with you what are the challenges for necessity-driven entrepreneurs in the rurals? The awareness, the opportunities in terms of accessing finance, of course. For example, in the Kura district, even though we are full with initiatives, we don't qualify apparently for the USAID or any kind of programs because for some reason it's decided to become it's privileged area, It's not privileged area. Now everyone needs help. There are still towns that do not have a sewage network system. There are towns that do not have power at all. So, of course, there are a lot of things that need to be done that I'm sure every one of you know it, but I want to talk more about policies that can start like small, like my initiatives, and maybe can get some success stories and can build, like bottom-up approach. So like for the first one I would like to mention is the training of trainings. So maybe throughout training these experts that we have or people who are interested in being agents of change or maybe even students, university lecturers, in a way where we can create a program that is based on good practices in community-based projects. For example, with the municipalities. Like each municipality, we will be mapping it and then we will understand its problems. But I'm telling you, there's no one solution that could fit all. So this kind of tailoring each program, it's tricky, but it's very manageable if there is a certain program to deal with that, and then people will be trained and then they will be taking it further locally and in a decentralized way, because there is no problem that looks like the other problem and could get the same execution. So also working with schools and municipalities, I'm aware of there are volunteering hours that are imposed on schools to graduate their students that revolve around community-based projects. When you look into their programs, you see that they are quite superficial. Maybe we can try to also create another program for them where it will be engaging them with real solutions. And, never underestimate not only the rural areas, but also the time and resourcefulness of teenagers. Teenagers have a lot of free time. Instead of investing in it in the video games, they could really learn all the complex entrepreneurial courses that we teach at the university and even post-university. They are fully capable, and we have data and literature that proved that teenagers can engage in projects, and it would teach them responsibility at a younger age, and this would probably affect their future much more than any Of course, a degree is important and university pursuing is important, but this will build their character, their soft skills, their negotiation, and applying knowledge, because many times we have degrees in the schools and university that do not allow them to apply the knowledge, and therefore this is an untapped power and resource. So mainly my recommendation policies revolve around collaborating with schools, municipalities, universities with a certain program that could be tailored for small micro businesses, rural areas, ecotourism. One of the initiatives that we started 5 years ago was in my hometown, it's Fir. We brought 60 students from UZEC and Balamand and NDU, and like in Arabic, فلتناهم بالضيعة. They went into the valley, and we realized that we have a valley that is like so magical. No one knows about it. If you go really deep, there is like a small water feature that we didn't know of, and it is endangered of being polluted from the sewage system, and it's endangered of even extinction of certain flora and fauna over there because of the bad practices happening in the valley because of like maybe pollution or waste or dumpsters and something like that. But if you really just leave it or clean it, it's a magical place that would, in my personal opinion, would not only bring people from all over Lebanon, but also from all over the world. It reminded me from certain areas in Peru, like people drive hours and hours on travel plans to go there, and there we have it, So, of course, luckily it's undermined because it's not gentrified. People still did not, go built randomly and haphazardly, but also it means that this is a hidden treasure and hidden gem. And with the right collaborators and stakeholders, if the municipality would be really interested in creating change, or other stakeholders who really can create change, it could have brought this place into the map, which means that it would become maybe formal employment, people from all over the world come, it's a peaceful place, so much potential. But more than, I would like to stress here, because from my innovation expertise, is that more than anything, I would like really to not recreate, because I'm worried I gave the impression that we can recreate something done somewhere else in my hometown, rather than create on these focus groups on the untapped passions and local interest and local talents, in order to bring something new with an added value and a unique point of, how do we say it? Like UVP, unique value proposition. So we can be able to sustain, because when something come up with, because when we have new service or a new product, if it looks like any other product or service, it might not last. So this is not smart for us to adopt. And if we create something that is not embedded from our culture and needs and wants, also it would not last. This is why we need to rethink and include design thinking in every aspect, because it's the approach that would allow participation, it's the approach that would allow a real sustainable solution. And even if the solution at this point is not perfect, working with it along with time, we will make it cheaper, faster, better. People would want to adopt it. Is it my time up, or I have time? Okay, I have 2 minutes. So in this 2 minutes, I would just like to say thank you again. I'm really happy to be here, and I want to invite you to think of problems that can be taking actions to solve, because without actionable details that we all can together decide on and commit to, we will not create any kind of change. We will read a lot of data, we will be very much impressed, but we will not actually accomplish change. So I really invite you to take actions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Asil. Okay, so moving from what Asil was discussing about design thinking, I'll go into our third session on diversification in economic sectors. One of our main recommendations in the policy brief was to help improve the quality of life for NDEs and their families in rural areas, is encouraging diversification of these rural areas, given the particular challenges that NDEs are facing regarding their growth, job generation, and sustainability. So, generally speaking, rural development and diversification helps to broaden the economic activity within rural areas, provide new opportunities, and create a more balanced and stable economy. Also, this rural economic diversification, whether it is within the agricultural sector or into non-agricultural activities, has significant potential for poverty reduction, increasing the coping mechanisms for farmers or smallholders in case of crisis, in case of price volatility, and in turn improve the food and livelihood security for rural households. So while some significant segment of the rural NDEs in Lebanon are employed in non-farm work, still the bulk or the large share of the population continues to work in the agricultural sector for their livelihoods. So a dynamic agricultural sector should always be placed in the center of rural development strategies. However, this shall not restrict the enabling of the growth of non-farm activities in the rural economy. This should depend always on the local characteristics of rural municipalities. There's no one size that fits all. The type of activities that can be generated in Rashaya are different from the type of non-agricultural activities that can be generated in Fnaidik or in Jizin or in other parts of Lebanon. So rural diversification can happen when the agricultural sector and other rural businesses decide to expand the ways in which they make money and move away from only traditional farming activities. I'm going to provide some examples which form different categories of non-agricultural activities that can be supported by governments. The services activities, for example, such as the bed and breakfast, education and social activities on farms, crafts activities, pottery, silversmith, any crafts activities that protect our cultural heritage and cultural identity, and the production of local products. Also, trade activities such as the creation of stores, for example, or rehabilitation of old buildings that are attached to farms and farming areas where artisan products that can be sold directly to the customers. Also, the recreation and leisure, especially in rural areas with strong agricultural sector. So some farms can use parts of their land in order to do some ecotourism activities and encourage their local economy. This also has an important advantage that it reduces the migration of the youth in rural areas. Youth that do not want to work in the agricultural sector will have other activities to work on along the value chain. So this is for the diversification. And I will move the floor to Ali Saad, who is going to talk about the digitization and the knowledge transfer, which I think bridges everything that we have talking about as a necessity in rural areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Lina. It's a pleasure to be here, joining you all. Today, we will try to answer, for me, 3 questions. The first one is, what is digitization in the first place? The second is, why is it important for necessity-driven entrepreneurs and businesses in rural areas? And the third is, how can authorities support this transformation? So starting with what is digitization? Essentially, digitization means incorporating technology into your business operations to increase efficiency, enhance customer experience, and boost sales mainly. So this could mean developing an app for your business, transitioning into e-commerce, offering mobile payment options, and many more things. The goal of business digitizing is to keep up with the rapidly changing economy by offering customers more ways to access businesses, cut costs, and streamline daily operations. Therefore, the methods we choose for digitizing is very much dependent on the business needs. In general, a successful digitization has 3 crucial components. We have the people, the process, and the technology. And challenges faced by local businesses typically evolve around these areas too. While it's common to think that digitization or digital transformation is an IT consideration only, it should involve the entire business, and that starts with the people. New technology without people with the right skills and the mindset behind it will not work. So in the process of digitization, the objective is to transfer the valuable domain knowledge that people have by reskilling and upskilling them to improve their possibilities of growing and sustaining their businesses. And if we are talking about entrepreneurs in rural areas, we are talking about firstly trying to remove the psychological barrier or stigma that some might have for the use of technology in their businesses, and then equip them with the specific digital skills that they need. So now that we know what digitization is, we can move on to why digitization is important. What's the benefit? To answer this question, we have to talk about two things first. One is, why is it important for necessity-driven entrepreneurs and their businesses? And the second question is, why is it important for governments? So starting with the first one, with the importance of necessity-driven, with the benefit for, the first benefit for digitization provided to businesses is in, we say, engaging customers, okay? So starting with the importance of necessity-driven entrepreneurs, the first benefit that digitization provides to businesses is engaging customers, okay? A significant portion of customers nowadays are digital natives, and their numbers are quickly increasing. So naturally, business with an online presence have the upper hand at appealing to this key group. And digitization goes beyond creating a website or Instagram profile. The magic of digitization comes with the data it collects, because digitization generates insights to help businesses understand their customers and measure the effectiveness of their marketing campaigns, for example. This is invaluable for small businesses with modest marketing budget. Also, in terms of advertising in the online space is more affordable than the traditional newspaper or magazine, and it is more targeted as well. So businesses can elect the type of customer they would like to push products to, based on age, location, and preference. The web data that is collected from customer interaction with an online asset can also translate into valuable information as to who customers are and what they like about the business. Okay. The second benefit that digitization provides to businesses is in optimizing processes. So we mean by optimizing processes, increasing efficiency of business operations. So there are countless accessible cloud services in the market that can help businesses manage workflows, easily access data, and consolidate key applications. Okay? These programs were previously only available for large organizations with big infrastructures, but now they are available for businesses of all sizes. The third benefit that digitization provides to businesses is in transforming products and services. Digitization could open a necessity-driven entrepreneurs' eyes to new revenue streams and improvements to current products based on direct feedback from customers. These insights could secure business longevity as it enables entrepreneurs to meet changing customers' expectations. By staying attuned to customers' needs, NDEs can increase customer satisfaction with service improvement. So when it comes to transforming products and services, it might be sometimes as simple as using an accounting software to automatically generate invoices. And if you want to take it to the next level, maybe adapting e-commerce function to the business website or improving a product with an app. So the second question that might be more important for our audience here is, why is it important for governments to support rural NDEs in digitization? To answer this, we can say that the digitization of rural entrepreneurship is of extreme importance for the development and competitiveness of rural businesses. And it is a highly effective growth strategy for businesses in emerging markets of the world. And there is much evidence that in many countries, the improvement of entrepreneurial activities is regarded as a strategy to boost national productivity and job creation, which also improve economic independence. The entrepreneurial endeavors strengthen personal and collective capabilities among local communities. So in improving rural businesses can minimize migration of rural population to urban areas. It can also improve standards of living of local communities, and it can promote rural tourism-related activities. The trend for job creation by the small business sector found in many EU countries has resulted in overall economic growth, and improved standards of living are apparent within rural communities in these countries. So lastly, to answer the last question about how can authorities support the digitization of rural businesses. I want to say that in Lebanon, the digitization of small and micro rural businesses can't happen without the partnership between different stakeholders. But the government's role is essential for this transformation. So, starting with the legal framework of things, the importance of these businesses to the country's economy indicates the significance of government policies that support IDEs, including regulations that enables them to operate efficiently and reduce their administrative costs. The government hence need to adopt friendly policies for rural NDEs to enable their survival and growth. In many developing countries, government initiatives which promote and support NDEs in enhancing their development and reducing poverty lack a proper framework and are hindered by bureaucratic process and other barriers, okay? Such as genuinely effective administrative processes, including access to relevant government agencies. Governments therefore need to implement business policies that allow rural entrepreneurs to remain operational without having to contend with overburdening bureaucratic restrictions. On the direct support side of things, the government can promote the development of online platforms that can connect NDEs with their customers, with additional benefits to local rural tourism. Also, the government is responsible for enhancing digital infrastructure, adopting remote forms of service delivery to rural areas, and delivering e-financial and technical aid. Finally, in collaboration with local and international funding partners, the government can provide funding programs to finance digital transformation, create digital learning platforms for small businesses, and promote digital tools and equipment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. We have 10 minutes to take any questions. If you have any questions regarding any of the following recommendations, addressing informality, strategic planning and design thinking, diversification, and digitization. So, yes, please.
I have a question, if I may.
Yes, please.
It's to Mr. Rajad. You mentioned, well, those are the points that I was able to take notes of them, but you, correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned leveling the field through empowering. Okay. So you mentioned leveling the field between the employee and the employer through unions, and you also mentioned something about enforcing the formality, but without crushing the business completely, and something related to enforcing also social security, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to misquote you, that's why I'm repeating them. And you also, at the end of the, you also mentioned that we cannot have a competition between formal companies that are are having formal employment or themselves are formal, and those who are working informally. So my question is, first of all, if companies that are working informally are succeeding, why not follow their trend when it comes to the ease of working or registering, or the need for this company to easily register or work without a big brother following them all the time and making sure that everyone does what somebody else thinks is best. That's first, especially that private insurance, for example, beats the social security on every metric when it comes to the moment that you need it, especially in a country under crisis right now. Having social security is basically like having nothing. You're just paying for it. And also at the, when it comes to leveling the field through unions, don't you share the opinion with me that the best way to level the field with, between the employee and the employer is having more employers? Therefore, the employee would just say, fine, you don't want to give me the job, I'm leaving, and the process of having formal employment is quite easy. I just go tell the ministry I'm working, and the ministry wouldn't burden me with their bureaucratic requirements. And when it comes to the formality of the company, also, if you go to any economy that is having somewhat of a proper status right now, because we're in a crisis worldwide. But for example, you could register a company in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, for $6 without the need of having an auditor or a lawyer, and they're surviving quite well. But when you come to Lebanon, you need to pay around $4,000 per year as annual fees for the lawyer, something like that for the auditor, and then you have, if you want to shut down, you need to pay like double the amount just to be able to afford it. I mean, shouldn't we learn from the informal market in order to, shouldn't we learn from the informal market? Because it's obvious that the formal market is what is pushing people towards, I mean, nobody wants to have a company with no name, no title, no registration, but when it comes to either not working or working, I mean, the informal market is succeeding by far more than the formal one, and that's based on your numbers. They're employing 90% of the people, so, or at least 90% of a certain group. So,
Okay, just...
sorry for the long question,
No,
but
no.
I had to make sure that I quoted them
Yeah.
properly.
Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Garabet Fakrajian. I'm a senior policy analyst at the Lebanese Institute for Market Studies.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I'll try to address them as quickly as I can. Actually start by what you ended on. That was not a positive figure when I said 90% of the migrants work informally. These people have no other option. So it's not that the informal sector is, I mean, yeah, I think that's a quite nice anecdote, but the idea isn't to say that the informal sector is employing 90% of the migrants, because that's not really how it's happening. First of all, it's not 90% of the migrants. 9 out of every 10 migrants working are working informally, right? So there's a lot of them that are also unemployed. And they are, yeah, exactly, and they are there by necessity. I think it's nice that we're here on the subject of necessity-driven entrepreneurs. Necessity here is the main issue. I'm an informal worker, by the way. We and the ILO do fall under that section. So it's not really about informal worker bad or informal work bad, formal work good. Obviously, the ILO has different considerations, by the way. You can have that discussion aside. But no one works informally if they have the option to work formally, all right? That is something we've seen everywhere. The reason why you have the 8-hour workday is because we formalized these things and made sure that no one can work 9, even if they're the most ambitious person, or at least they can get paid differently. This approach to work, I understand that in Lebanon, a lot of the times we're inclined to sort of throw our hands in the air and say just the government doesn't work. Employment itself is a relationship based on interests, all right? The employer has an interest in employing you, and you have an interest in being employed. This situation, as we've seen multiple times, as our studies have shown on informal workers, yes, they are employed, but the large majority of them are working poor. That means they are working and they are still under the poverty line. And that is informal work. They are working poor. That's why when we got to the point, I said we need job generation. Job generation is just the basis of it. I cannot tackle informality again, that's what I hinted at when I said that we cannot go to people and ask them either don't work or work informally. This is something that, especially in a country without a strong social security net, jobs are a matter of survival. So right now, a hardline approach of informal workers, informal company, close it, informal worker, send them home, just doesn't work, which is why I wanted to humanize it. And I think unions have a very social dialogue in general. Unions for workers, associations, or employer associations in general. They have an important role because they can work through dialogue outside of the bureaucratic red tape that you're mentioning, whether it's in registering employment, registering the company, or otherwise. But they can also help improve the working conditions of their workers. We've seen that throughout COVID. Most of the solutions that have been happening at the worker level have been happening at the company level. We have yet to see that. We've only now increased the wages of public workers just a few weeks back. So no, we should not learn from the informal sector, because the informal sector is a sector that is driven by need. There's a lot of poor people. There's no guarantee that you're going to work, and you cannot just have informality without with more jobs, if that's what you're saying, because, and I firmly believe that if there are enough jobs, there will be no informal employment in Lebanon. That is the thing. Every time you ask around, I've seen the figure in LCPS's study, and we collect that on a frequent basis in the labor force survey. The reason why people choose to work as own account workers, which is the statistical term for what many of those NDEs would fall under, is I could not find another job. Not I like the liberty, not because I don't like the government or dealing with them, it's because they have no other option. So as objective observers, we can say that the informal work or the informal sector is more lenient and more flexible, sure. But the working conditions have been across the board. This is what you've seen all the time, that working conditions in the informal sector, especially one that is driven by need, like the one in Lebanon. But there's a need. I can see a job and know if I don't take it, I won't have food on the table next week. And I need to improve my experience, right? There's two different levels of need. And the fact that informality in Lebanon is, you can see it more in the lower echelons in terms of the productivity, adherence to laws in general for those activities. There's a reason why we have two figures for informality, one for agriculture and one without, because those types of vulnerable workers do tend to go to informality, not because they have an extreme business sense or a neoliberal instinct. It's because they have no other option. So unless...
Because it's too hard to, that's my point.
But you cannot, but with informality, you cannot build, That's the problem. That is something that...
Just to register.
That is an issue.
Nobody will go forward.
Yeah.
That's the point I'm trying to make.
I agree.
No,
Administrative risk.
nobody in their sane mind will pay double their capital just to register the company.
I understand. And these are issues that are obviously very important. But from a labor point of view, I can tell you that this approach, this idea of just let things be, laissez passer, just doesn't work. We've seen this in multiple, even in more recent, like I'm not even talking about the Industrial Revolution, we're talking about sectors like the gig workers, for example. These are informal workers. They're quite efficient in terms of how they do things, but they're not really happy, are they? They're doing it because they have no other option, a lot of them, at least, right? So anytime you create this vacuum of regulation in the labor market, we tend to see the same things happening: bad working conditions, low wages. And just to sort of close this loop, I sense there's a chicken and egg dilemma in what you're saying, and I can see that, because you need jobs so people can leave informality, but informality is the only one creating jobs, or at least you have that sense from your question. That is where a level playing field is important. Informal workers, beyond the resources, the financial, or even the work, the labor rights. You can tell me when to stop. I can keep answering.
We're going to have this chat
But one last thing is, the problem is, Kaman, you have, if you're an informal worker, you have less opportunities to develop your career as well. So there's also a benefit for the company to have a formal worker that is formalized, that is fixed with them, so they can invest in them. So there's a lot of ways to approach informality, right? But the thing is, you cannot create informal employment in the current situation with that much informality, and that's.
But the greedy businessman wants to keep his workers. I mean, the point is that the person, driven by greed, wants to keep his workers, so he wants to please them. The thing is, the more we have greedy people ready to pay for the employee to work for them, just like it happened in Hong Kong, people had the choice between philosophical labor conditions and actual availability. And Hong Kong started from a country where you would work in terrible working conditions into a country where if you, I mean, the salaries are out of the world. Some salaries are like you need to work 2 lifetimes or 3 lifetimes in other countries to achieve them. And this was only achieved by having proper businesses, having businesses fight over the employee, not the other way around. In Lebanon, the main issue with employment is that you do not have enough formal businesses so to compete over the employee. And the reason behind not having formal businesses is that it's better to stay illegal, and it's way cheaper, way safer, and way more affordable, especially in a crisis.
It will always be cheap.
But way cheaper. I mean, it's like, again, the greedy businessman has a balance where he wants to pay for good. He wants to keep his employees. They're an investment. They're the biggest asset in a company. I'm sure you've worked with companies. You spoke to businessmen. The employee, the labor force, is the biggest asset for a company. So losing them isn't a good option for him, but he has to lose them because somebody else is stopping him from working and keeping them and working in a formal domain, because formal domain is becoming impossible to endure.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah, we'll
continue the
this,
discussion on it.
over coffee. If anyone has another questions, yeah, please.
No, go ahead.
It's a very simple question. My question is for Mr. Ali. How easy is it to do crowdfunding in Lebanon, and has it been done already? Since it's a digital related question, I wanted to ask you that. I don't have a lot of experience in that, but it's a very interesting funding solution. But I wanted to know if it is easy to do in these current circumstances. How is it done, and has it been done before?
Well, for crowdfunding, I'm not like the expert in this, but what I can say is crowdfunding is not something spontaneous. It needs expertise. So if we're talking about small businesses or NDEs, which usually have no budgets and they have a limited set of skills. So when we say crowdfunding, we are already saying that we need to bring some people to try to do this thing for us. So it's kind of outsourcing the people that have this set of skill instead of trying to implement such thing for people with limited knowledge about the subject. And I'm sure there is much more sophisticated answer, but this is what I can tell you.
Okay.
May I answer?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I think there are crowdfunding. I mean, it exists in Lebanon through financial institutions, and I don't think it was done digitally yet, but it is through financial institutions.
So like not
Well,
NDEs, like not.
Any other questions, please? Yes.
Just a brief one. Hi, everyone. Nisreen Barake from AIM Research and Consulting. I just have a quick question when it comes to the percentage of formal versus informal sector in Lebanon. Do we have new data when it comes to that? And do we have data specifically for women entrepreneurs in the informal sector?
Yes, I think in the new labor force survey.
The labor force survey has the figure. So as I said, 62.4% is informal employment, right, of total employment in Lebanon. That's 2022, January 2022. So we do have that recent figure. Now, do we have figures for women? Yes, although let me caveat that. Own account workers in general, statistically, they are automatically classified under informal workers, right? not employers, own account workers, so like a tiny shop owner. So the figure for those in female would be the informal level, like figure for women if you're going to look for it. So we don't put them as entrepreneurs because the labor statistics conventions list them as own account workers. All right. And we've actually seen own account workers as a testament of the need aspect of NDEs. We've seen own account workers, for example, decrease. And that, I think that's important, if I may have 10 seconds, because NDEs and own account workers, the problem is they become, I won't say a liability, they're a pool of potential workers. They're not necessarily looking for a job now, but if you create jobs, they will enter. So they have to be factored in at some point. Those that do make it as entrepreneurs, sure. But those that are only there because they need, once the labor market picks up, there's also another force that's going to join, which is why we talk about potential labor force. That would also be an interesting figure to look at in the recent statistics, because they would show the number of people that would join the labor market once we do create jobs. Please go.
Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Nassim Abi Shaheen. أحكي بالعربي يمكن. It's a practical question. عندي جيم وهالجيم في حده مطعم صغير. أنا عم طالع منه تقريبا بيفوت عليه $6,000 بالشهر. بحط $4,000 للكهرباء. ما بعرف يعني إذا عندكم حل، لأنه ما سمعت حدا اليوم يعني addressing this catastrophic situation in Lebanon. كيف بدي حمس اخواتي مثلا يفتحوا مشروع بلبنان طالما عم بيكون عندنا هالابزوربشن هيدي. Thank you.
Yes, well, the energy problem is one of the major impediments for the. Oh, do you prefer if I answer in Arabic? اوكي بدي اقول انه مشكله الطاقه هي مشكله اساسيه، وكل الانديز يلي نحن كنا قبلناهم بالانترفيوز يلي عملناها بالبحث تبعنا ضووا على هيدا المشكله كمشكله اساسيه لهن يقدروا يشتغلوا on a day to day basis، يعني يكملوا شغلهم اليومي، خاصه القطاعات مثلا اللي لها علاقه بالفود بروسيسنج اللي هن بحاجه انه يخزنوا الفواكه او يحطوا يستعملوا برادات يوميه او هيدا. ونحن كنا ذكرناها ما بعرف اذا كنت حضرتك موجود، بس عملت برزنتيشن للبحث بالاول من عطول، كانت من ابرز الاشياء اللي بكل القطاعات هي اساسيه. هلا هودي بنقول لهم في هودي الNDEs بحاجه ل immediate response، بيناتها هي التأمين الطاقة على أكيد المستوى الأمد القصير، وبعدين على الأمد الطويل والبعيد بسبل أكثر استراتيجية وصديقة للبيئة مثل السولار بانلز وهيدي الأشياء. فكنا ضوينا على السيركولار ايكونومي بالبحث تبعنا، وبعد شوي رح نحكي عن الفاينانشال سبورت اللي هن بحاجة له الNDEs، يلي هن أول ما يستخدموه رح يستخدموه ليلبوا احتياجاتهم من الطاقة. يعني هيدا هن بحاجة للموارد المادية لتلبية هيدا الموضوع بشكل أساسي.
يعني انه اللي بيشوفني عن بعيد بيقول هيدا كيف فاتح هالمشروع، يعني شو تبييض اموال؟ اكيد انا طبيب بعمل 10 عمليات بالشهر لحتى ال10 عمليات يسدوا عجز الكهرباء. تفتح نادي رياضي بمجال الصحه لحتى يشتغلوا فيه 30 شخص مينيموم من عدد البارت تايمرز ترينرز يلي بيجوا، بس it is a catastrophic situation.
نعم نعم. بدك تقولي شيء؟
أنا كانت الريمارك تبعي إنه يعني وقت كنت عم جرب حضر شو بدنا نحكي، كنت عم فوكس على شيء من بوتم أب، يعني كلنا كيف بدنا ناخد أكشن تنعمل أكيد تغيير. والاكشن هي your will انك تفتح شيء وبعدين تلاقي حل لها. فيها تكون من خلال تعاون مع بلديه تعمل سولار فارم. عندنا هيدا البست براكتس معمول بضيعه بالشمال، اذا بتعرفوا فيها يمكن طولة مرقت معكم بالريسيرش. سو اللي عم جرب اقوله في اشياء هي نحن منا هلا بايدنا دغري نعملها، بس اذا كلنا نحط ايدنا مع بعضنا ونلاقي حلول ذكيه بطريقه التفكير والاكشن اللي عم ناخده اون ديلي بيسز، بصير في حاجه وبصير الحاجه ام الاختراع، بنقدر نعمل هذا التشبيك ويعني نكون نحن حاضرين للاوبورتونيتي اللي بتجي تنقدر ناخذها. انا جربت شدد قد ما فيني على البوتم اب ابروتش، لانه اكيد قلت لكم في اشياء مشاكل كثير نحن بنعرفها ما نتخبى وراء اصبعنا، يعني الطاقه، العشوائيه، الاشياء الاساسيه لاي حدا يقدر يفتح شغل ويكون فورمال. يعني هيدي هلا يعني اصلا كيف بدنا نكون فورمال؟ ما فينا نفتح بالبنك اكاونت اسم الشركه كرمال تنقدر نحن تو فورمالايز هيدا الشغله. يعني اكيد في اشياء منا بايدنا، وبحب هون نوه الانفورمال منه الليجل. ثانك يو.
سؤال، في عدد حد ادنى من الموظفين بالشركه تكون الزامه ان تسجلهم بالضمان الاجتماعي، صحيح؟ بعتقد ما بعرف اذا 3 أو 5. بعتقد انا كمان 3 أو 5 اسمع. اوكي، هلا قديش من هالانفورمال امبلويمنت اللي حكيت عنها هي شركات صغيره فيها تحت 5 موظفين؟ لانه يمكن تكون هيدي تشكل نسبه عاليه جدا من هالانفورمال.
مش الزام التسجيل، غير انه ممنوع التسجيل. يعني اللي عنده 3 موظفين ومنه ملزم يسجل وفي يروح يسجل